While other areas such as Newcastle are suffering 30 to 40% falls in housing construction, Port Stephens is enjoying a 50% growth rate. The council has been monitoring that growth with glee, and it says 22 blocks have been sold in the first 2 months of this year, compared to 21 in last year's March quarter. In the past 3 years, 357 houses have been built on the peninsula, an average of about 10 houses completed a month. But why is Port Stephens booming while other areas are in decline?
There are two main reasons. Firstly, the natural attributes of our area has contributed to the ongoing interest in our area. And in particular, with regards to our own, when I say our own, I mean the Shire's own development, the methods of marketing that are obviously contributing to a success rate.
While the council's Salamander estate is doing well, selling some 60 properties last year, those sales account for only 20% of the total for the area, which means that other subdivisions there are also
Ask about the
benefiting
inspiring
from its
plans for this new
advertising
town. Visit Salamander or phone this number now and start building a world of your own.
So does this
I love it here at Salamander. Why don't you join me?
Despite the weight of opposition?
Well, the figures are there, and I mean that's all council can deal in is facts, and the facts are very, very strong. That the critics, I think, are wrong, and I think the idea of council to market the assets that are owned by the ratepayers of the Shire are correct, and those figures will continue to be very strong.
But they were solid as a rock. They weren't going to move on the issue. They want to go out with a bit of dignity and self-respect. They'll offer up their services to complete the contracts in the yard. They'll complete the work on the vessel, and they'll float it out, and it'll go on its merry way. That'll be our next move, is to find out have a look at the terms of reference for lease or sale, and we'll want to talk to those people who want to get into the dockyard and reopen it.
They're going to prefer to work under a private enterprise rather than the government, they're saying?
Well, it's not their decision that they're now out there in the marketplace. They'll register for the dole, and they'll be around looking for jobs.
While the national wine industry saw sales rise by 2%, for Wyndham, their sales rose 50%, a major contributor to the company's $2.9 million profit. Wyndham Estate now supplies 10% of all Australian wine exports, with markets in Canada, the United States, Japan, Great Britain and France. Managing Director of Wyndham, Brian McGuigan, says the success is largely attributable to being a hunter region company and being very close to the major population area in Australia. He hopes that this year will be another good one for the estate and for the hunter wine growing area.
The leaf will convert into sugar.
This was the first winner of Australia's oldest art prize, Walter Withers' The Storm. Since it was started in 1897, the Wynne Prize has seen many changes in painting styles, from the traditional Streeton's Afternoon Light to Russell Drysdale's Sapphire, to the most recent painting in this exhibition, Lloyd Rees' Morning on the Derwent. Up until 1944, the judges preferred the traditional painters, but since then, Brett Whiteley and a number of other less conventional artists have captured this coveted prize. This is the last exhibition that will be held in the old council chambers. The Lake Macquarie City Council has decided to lease the space to the Joint Coal Board. According to Deputy Town Clerk Trevor Saunders, the decision to move the gallery was for financial reasons, but he says the room in the old chambers has always been a temporary solution. Council will determine the gallery's new location at Monday night's meeting.
Welcome to the NBN Telethon Marathon Report. I'm Matthew Clark. Day 3 today and the marathon is in full swing. Runners are running towards Newcastle from all parts of the Hunter Valley, and as well this afternoon there are many boat events across the Myall Lakes and Port Stephens. This morning the runners en route to Newcastle from the Upper Hunter were steadily moving closer to the final destination. The Merriwar team had dropped off the baton containing the Prime Minister's message in Muswellbrook yesterday, and today the runners from Muswellbrook started out on their 50-kilometre run to Singleton. The team includes 2 female runners in Jan Ledgerwood and Andrea Fraser, and both say they're doing the distance to show that women can do it as well as the men. Also running with the team is an athlete who has just returned from representing Australia in the World Visually Impaired Games in Sweden. John Demandle is taking part because he believes it's a worthwhile cause and as training for the upcoming national titles. As well as the Upper Hunter runners, another group started this morning from Gloucester. But for something different this afternoon, the teams coming down the coastline from Foster will cross the Myall Lakes and Port Stephens in rubber duckies, oyster punts and catamarans. For more highlights, join us in the NBN News tonight at 6. In the Upper Hunter this morning, the runners in Muswellbrook were getting ready for a 50-kilometre jog to Singleton. The baton containing the Prime Minister's message had arrived in the town yesterday in the hands of the Merriwar team, leaving it up to the Muswellbrook runners to do their bit for telethon. The team included 2 female runners in Jan Ledgerwood and Andrea Fraser, and both were running to show that women can do it just as well as men. The team also included an athlete who has just returned from representing Australia in the World Visually Impaired Games in Sweden. John Demandle entered because he says it's a worthwhile cause and for training for the upcoming national titles. And he says his disability was no handicap in the run.
I can follow the crowd, follow the lines on the road. My eyes aren't, I'm not totally blind, my eyes are deteriorated a fair bit, but I can get by all right.
As well as the Upper Hunter runners, another group started this morning from Gloucester, but it was the teams coming down the coastline who provided something a little different. The Tea Gardens team made their way to Karua across the Myall Lakes in a surf rescue rubber ducky, and some of their fellow entrants also went by water across Port Stephens in catamarans and on an oyster punt. The marathon culminates tomorrow when runners from all 4 routes to Newcastle will converge on the city for the grand finale at 5:30 at City Hall. The man was operating a front-end loader at the Civil Asphalt plant at the time of the accident. Police say that at about 7:30 this morning, Colin Frederick Wilkins was loading a storage bin with blue metal dust. The dust, which is carried by a conveyor, may have become clogged. The result was that Wilkins climbed into the bin and fell. It's believed he was suffocated and died before help arrived. 3 other men were working on the site at the time, but in different areas of the plant, and nobody witnessed the accident. Rescue teams freed the man shortly after, and a post-mortem will be held tomorrow.
The 4-day marathon began last Thursday at Murrurundi. With well wishes from the Prime Minister, the 6 runners set off on the longest haul of the marathon over Route 1. On the second day, the telethon message about the menace of drugs in our society was being carried over Route 2, down the coast from the twin towns of Foster Tuncurry. The coastal route included one of the toughest legs of the event, from Pacific Palms to Bulladila along the winding mountain road. Then the teams took to the water, crossing the Myall Lakes and Port Stephens in oyster punts, catamarans and rubber duckies. Day 3 and the route continued from Muswellbrook, passing through Singleton before reaching Cessnock. The third day also saw the start of Route 3, down to Newcastle from Gloucester. On Sunday, they were setting out from Dungog on the final day. By this time, the runners were crossing 4 different routes from throughout the Hunter to Newcastle. The event took to the water again as skiers carried the message across a section of Lake Macquarie. Late yesterday afternoon, all runners converged on Newcastle City Hall, where they crossed the finish line with the gruelling 4-day marathon behind them and the telethon appeal about to begin.
Metro Meats is owned by the Adelaide Steamship Company. Its purchase of the 4 abattoirs at Gosford, Maitland, Wyong and Wagga makes it the single biggest meat processing concern in New South Wales. Details of the sale are being kept under wraps, but for the time being, abattoirs in the Hunter Valley have been told it's business as usual. The Australasian Meat Employees Union says the abattoirs have been sold lock, stock and barrel. The union is seeking an assurance from the new management that their operations will not be scaled down.
Well, our number one concern, of course, is the security of our members' jobs. And we'd be hoping that each and every one of those jobs will be kept under the new ownership.
Have you been given that assurance?
No, at this stage we've not. We're waiting on a conference to take place with the Metro Meats management, and that'll be our priority to seek assurances on job security.
The union says it's fairly sensitive about the changeover because the last shake-up in the industry resulted in the closure of the Byron Bay Meatworks in 1983. Maitland escaped closure only after Charles David took over its operations. The management of Metro Meats was not available for comment today, but the union says it will continue to seek an assurance that the jobs of the 600 men and women employed in the Hunter Valley Meatworks are secure.
The Hunter Valley was doing a great job of promoting itself today, with warm autumn sunshine streaming down onto a luscious bed of green. While inside Rothbury Estate's giant cask hall, 8 top wine identities were judging the inaugural Qantas Wine Cup. This is where 80 current release Australian wines were pitted against the best 80 that the USA has to offer. The whole thing was the brainchild of Hunter identity and international judge Len Evans, who had wanted the competition to coincide with the America's Cup. However, it wasn't until now that all 8 judges became available, and they are being thorough.
Almost every class we had another bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles.
The other Australian judges were James Halliday, writer for The Australian, and Ian McKenzie from Seppelts and chairman of the Adelaide Wine Show. The American side was Terry Robards, Peter Sechel and Anthony Dias-Blue. Keeping them honest were the leading identity, Englishman Hugh Johnson, and another Briton, Oz Clarke. Qantas's part was to get them here just for the 2 days and then get them home again. Encouraging for the amateur wine taster was the sight of a confused-looking James Halliday. Soon after, he called for a second bottle of that one. And Oz Clarke, who proved that even the best wines can sometimes find total disfavour with one of the world's best palates. By the way, Oz is also a West End theatre identity in London. The life of a wine judge is not all as glamorous as it may be painted, particularly this time, according to Hugh Johnson.
I think I expected a few more thrills, but then, you know, the tasting bench, thrills are pretty rare because we're tasting a lot of very young wines, which are very tannic, which aren't very pleasant to taste. You know, they'll get much better with age. There's a muddle of old ones and new ones. There's just imagine tasting 20 different youngish Cabernets. I mean, if you can, just one after the other and spitting them out, you just get a general sort of hard feeling of tannin in your mouth. And you have to concentrate like blazes to see through that thick feeling in your mouth and see what sort of fruit flavours there are in there.
So you're judging them for what they are or for their potential?
We've got to judge them for what they are, because the potential's in the lap of the gods.
And the results, Australia or the USA, and which wine wins the Qantas Cup, are also in the lap of the gods still. They've not yet been announced.
The Sydney-based company Pointel purchased the High Street buildings when Galton's relocated in September last year. The development application, involving the demolition of the 3 adjoining Galton's buildings, the central section dating back to the mid-1800s, was awaiting council approval. Last night the green light was given by the Maitland City Council, but with certain conditions attached. The proposed redevelopment includes cinemas, restaurants, specialty shops and a supermarket. But Council has made it clear that all work must be architecturally sympathetic with the planned heritage mall. The developers have agreed to this and assure that every attempt to retain the character of the original Galtons will be made. Work will begin as soon as the final redevelopment plans are prepared. Mr Hunt was in the region supporting the National Party's candidate for the Hunter, John Turner, at the annual branch meeting. The Deputy Leader says that Sir Joe and the Queensland National Party have now divided the Conservative forces in an untimely move before the next election.
Well, I don't say it's a bad thing, but I think the rather disruptive activities of the Queensland National Party have been bad for the Conservative side of politics in an election year. I think it's been a very unfortunate gamble. It's been a very dangerous gamble. And what it's tended to do is to divide the Conservative forces very substantially, and the results in the Northern Territory aren't very encouraging. Labor had
Mr Hunt believes Sir Joe will in fact succeed in his march on Canberra. But as for his bid as the next Prime Minister...
Well, I find that very hard to believe, because at the last state elections the National Party didn't win any additional seats in the metropolitan areas of Brisbane. We didn't poll well in Darwin. For the National Party to provide the Prime Minister of Australia, we would have to win substantial electorates in Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth, and that's a very tall order.
But the Shadow Minister agrees the polls don't look good for John Howard.
You'd have to say, looking at the polls, that John Howard is facing some popularity difficulty. But John Howard is a very good manager. He may not have the image, but the next election, the people will have to decide whether they want images or managers.
Following last night's decision by Council, the motel can now be built on 3 blocks in the heart of this housing estate beside the Pacific Highway. The company, Gamer Whitby and Gamer Proprietary Limited, owns the land and intends to build a 51-unit complex. Barry Gamer developed the original estate. The plans for the motel on display at the Council chamber show a cluster development of 1- and 2-storey bungalows built around a swimming pool and central entertainment area. Tennis courts, a restaurant and function room also feature in the plans. Council has attached 22 conditions to its consent, including restrictions on noise and parking, but despite this, the project is not without opposition. Moteliers in the area believe there is insufficient business to support a 5th motel there. Residents living next to the site think the motel will detract from their estate.
We didn't come out here to have commercial propositions built right across from us, not on the highway, Helen. This development comes right into the middle of the estate.
Barry Gamer says when he developed the original estate he had no intention of putting in the motel, but a rezoning strategy by Council made that possible a few months ago, and the decision was taken then. Resident Alan Cox says he has learned a hard lesson.
Read your contracts. When you come to purchase property, make sure that you discover what's in the fine print. When you see in one section of the contract that hotels, motels, hostels, liquor licence outlets will not be allowed, don't take that for granted. Just have a look a little further on and you may see that the owner has the right to change that for possibly the next 15 years. That's the lesson, Helen.
Do you feel that you've been hoodwinked at all?
Yes.
This section of concrete roadway runs between the Doyleson turnoff and Wyong River. The 8-kilometre section is marred by wide cracks running the length of the road, which divide the slow speed lane in two. This section of the highway was first opened to traffic in December 1983, and almost immediately the cracks appeared. In the 3 years since, the DMR has been unable to solve the problem. This section was built by John Holland Constructions and was the first attempt in New South Wales to build what's known as a slip-form pavement road. At some parts of the road, the crack is quite wide. We've used this 20-cent piece to help show the size. So, what went wrong?
It's a combination of faults. The fault partially lies in the poor location of the sub-base joint, and we did accept that proposal from the contractor. The other fault arises from the poor construction of the crack inducer ribbon adjacent to the edge line, and that was obviously the contractor's fault. But which fault predominates is not an easy matter to resolve.
The problem with cracking is it allows water underneath the road, and attempts have been made to seal the crack, but these have failed.
And of course, once you've got water in a crack, the traffic load causes the crack to be propagated even more because of the hydrostatic pressures built up under the wheel loads.
Concrete road building was chosen for the National Highway project because it's about $1 million cheaper per 10 kilometre of road compared with asphalt. It also has a service life of 40 years when properly constructed. But the fact remains that the state government, which is supervising the building of this project, and the federal government, which is paying for it, must now be asking questions. Who pays for the repairs?
The DMR still pays for the repairs in this case. This was the first major slip-form paving job in Australia. It was new technology, which we estimate will save us millions of dollars, and at this stage we and the taxpayers have to pick up the tab on the learning curve before we reap the benefits of this new technology.
When the Region Art Gallery opened in Lehman Street in March 1977, it said goodbye to its previous home of 20 years, the Public Library. Since then, more than 1,700 paintings, sculptures and ceramics have been acquired to make up the gallery's collection. To celebrate its 10th birthday, 3 more works have been purchased, and plans to expand the gallery in 3 stages have been drawn up by the Newcastle City Council. Last night, the director of the Australian National Gallery in Canberra, James Mollison, addressed the 200 members of the Gallery Society on the works of one of Australia's greatest landscape artists, Fred Williams. Featuring some of Williams's paintings, Mr Mollison says the Newcastle Region Art Gallery is rated among one of the top 6 in the country.
Excellent collection. 3 state capital collections.